Right. So I'm an optimistic person. And although right now there is basically almost zero reason to be optimistic about continental Europe, I'm still optimistic. And I think that one of the good reasons to think about in a positive way is the rising MAGA movement. And people from all over the world are talking about how there is going to be a shift from MAGA to MAGA as well. And I'll be very frank and honest, I don't know exactly what this means yet, but I do want to find out. And I want to say that, okay, it's a good slogan, but we need to dig a bit deeper to see what the policies are.
Well, just as a quick thing, there's literally only one answer, and that's debureaucratization of the European continent.
Yes, exactly.
It's got to be less European Union, or else.
Yes. Yeah. And a different direction.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. And as I will say that the Greek person who spoke at the convention, Aphrodite Latinopoulou, she mentioned precisely the distinction between leaders and bureaucrats, and the EU is completely run by unelected bureaucrats at the moment.
Kidding.
But water is wet.
Breaking news.
Right. But we were saying last week that the more we see can-do government, the more we see politicians who actually care about their people, the more there is pressure against those who are representing can't-do government, and those who are using the media apparatus and the mainstream establishment in order to create a very narrow image of political possibility that says that basically the traditional role of government in promoting the interests of the people it is supposed to represent is an impossibility. Turns out it is not, and it's not rocket science. And we see here Argentina's President Javier Milei is forming an alliance with President Trump, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, Hungary Prime Minister Viktor Orban, and others. Right, so Elon is also talking from MAGA to MEGA. He's talking about the shift from Make America Great Again to Make Europe Great Again. Of course, there are several distinct interests here. Let's not be fools. The US interests and European interests aren't always converging, but there is enough room for win-win, I think, and this is the best way to think about it if we care about what we call, generally speaking, Western identity, that mostly encompasses Europe and the US. There needs to be a kind of win-win agreement. Obviously, there is going to be competition, but
competition is healthy.
Competition is healthy, and it's good if it is channeled that way. If there isn't so much a convergence between or an alliance between US and Europe, then a lot of really powerful players will try to swing one against the other, and that's not going to be good for the Western world. Right. So we had that conference in Madrid, and one of the main slogans was "We are the future."
Oh yeah.
Because the governments that are right now governing Europe are wrecking it, because they're promoting the EU agenda. But someone was really afraid of that summit, of that conference. And we see here, we have Google, and we type "Make Europe Great Again conference," and we see the kind of headlines we had. Trump-style victory, the aim for Europe's far right as leaders praise US President at Madrid conference.
So the USAID-funded media is not happy with this.
No, it's not happy.
Oh, boo-hoo.
We have here Politico. EU looking at Trump. Europe's far right vows to reconquer the continent.
Good.
That sounds kind of based.
Yeah, it sounds great.
Doesn't it?
Yeah. I'm all for it.
Make Europe Great Again. Far right European political leaders praise Trump at Madrid meeting. That's from LBC.
Yep.
Harry's favorite podcast, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
He's allowed to have a favorite. And I think James O'Brien is his favorite voice right there. Okay, New York Times. Far-right leaders rally in Spain to make Europe great again. Again, EU civil war as pro-Trump leaders discuss plans to make Europe great again. Belga News Agency. I think that's from Belgium. EU radical right feels empowered by Trump. We are the future.
Good.
NPR. Europe's far-right leaders applaud Trump and downplay threat of possible US tariffs. I have a particular dislike for this one first of all, I'm not a fan of tariffs, but it's okay. It's understandable. It's one way of exercising political force. But I despise the urgency it tries to create against the tariffs, as if that's the only problem that Europe is facing.
Yeah.
And this is what actually makes me very annoyed, and makes a lot of people annoyed, because it's basically beyond reasonable doubt that the mainstream media is actively trying to create an image that is completely mistaken, and it tries to tell people that, well, decline is the only possible future for you, and anything else is far right. Sorry, I don't want to decline. I don't want to decline.
You're completely on the money there. And what I like, though, is they kind of identify themselves as a cohesive political bloc when they all move in the same direction at the same time, right? So when you've got the right-wing European leaders elected or waiting in the wings, if they move in one direction and all of the media moves in the other direction, it creates a nice cleavage between them. So you can see, this is the woke forces of managerial decline versus the insurgent forces of something else that just could be better than becoming poorer and less free and less interesting and with less of a future. So it's actually, I think, really good. Good.
It is. And actually, I find out that I'm a bit more optimistic than I was 5 minutes ago when I framed the segment as starting with pessimism. Because I think that if the mainstream media keeps doing what it's doing, things are going to go well, because they've lost all credibility. People are at the point where everything mainstream media says, they believe the exact opposite.
It's
lot of, at least more and more people.
Yeah. It's not even a question of credibility. It's a question of loyalty. Yes. The media, the outlets you were just showing us, they're obviously against the success of the European people in general, broadly speaking. And so when you've got, that's a great lineup there. You can see Geert Wilders and various others on the stage. Like, you can see that this is genuinely drawing two camps that are going to be essentially democratically at war with one another. And, well, let's hope our guys win.
But that is the main issue here, because these people are thriving electorally speaking. Yes. Their percentages are rising because they represent the concerns of everyday people. And there's a segment of everyday people who are not falling for the mainstream narrative anymore, any longer, and they support them. And the more the mainstream media continues their narrative and continues to react with the same predictable and false way in every tragedy that happens on a daily basis, that number of people rises.
I'm not even sure if I'd frame it as false, to be honest. From their perspective, this is the far right, because they are so far to the left that, these people are far right because they're not centre-right conservative losers who are prepared to go along with the managed decline just slightly more reluctantly than the average leftist. And it's like, these people have represented a different paradigm. Something new is coming. And the old guard, they're very well funded by the US government. And God knows how much money the EU and British government and whoever else gives to these organizations. They're going to claw and fight and screech and kick and do everything they can to stop it. But let's be fair. If it's a light at the end of the tunnel or no light at the end of the tunnel, why would I choose your one?
Exactly. That's why I'm interested in the light at the end of the tunnel. And speaking of funding, there are ongoing investigations about funding of the EU by Qatar, and lots of the NGOs that are basically working to undermine European interests and the European interests of every single member state of the European Union. Yeah. And also there are obviously investigations about the role the US aid played into funding those NGOs. And I think a lot of people found out that some of the funding that was tied to the name of George Soros wasn't actually from his own money.
Oh, really?
Yes, he was being very charitable with other people's money.
Oh, wow. Who could have
and USAID was involved in it as well. Right, so here we have Milei sending a message to the Make Europe Great Again Madrid summit, and he's saying, long live freedom. Here we have the chains of freedom. He has spoken again about Europe, and he says basically that things are so bad that if you talk about the impact of mass migration in Europe, you're immediately branded as a mid-century German.
Yes.
Mid-century.
That's
German,
correct. Yeah, and that's
he's absolutely correct.
well, obviously, like it's yes, that's true. Yeah.
We also had the leader of the opposition in Venezuela, Maria Corina Machado, sending her message. I really hope she's well and she's not. She doesn't suffer any.
It doesn't disappear because they're a communist government and they'll disappear.
Yeah, but it's good that there is a sentiment from both continents in favor of a strong Europe, because what's the alternative? A very split West.
Well, the alternative is the general comprehensive victory of socialism over everything. And so, I mean, like, you don't have to have any particular love for any particular country to be like, well, I'd rather them not fall victim to the communists.
Exactly.
Like, again, I don't care about Latvia, but I don't want them to be taken over by communists.
Are you sure that a Venezuelan person requires anti-communism? Are you sure?
A lot of Venezuelans are for communism because they're employed by the government. Like, I'm not even joking.
Yeah, obviously not her.
Yeah, obviously
right.
not her.
So we had a really strong lineup. Here is Geert Wilders from Netherlands, and he basically said that we are gaining majorities. More and more people vote for us, and he said that the woke left represents an extremist agenda. I really like the framing. He says we refuse to surrender to the guilt tripping of the multiculturalists.
Yeah, that's all it takes.
Exactly, and that's a very strong way of putting it, because I think that multiculturalism, especially an abstract form of it, is literally destroying Europe. Multiculturalism is one of those words where people are saying right now in our circles we're supposed to go boo, and that's to a very large extent correct. But the issue is that you can have Europeans living together, but there are some other people who have vastly different hierarchies of value, and there are so many discontinuities between the main values that inform a country's institutions and host populations that create actually pressures for ghettos.
I think it goes further than this, though, because there's something about, like, okay, so a bunch of Europeans come over and live in Britain or something. They don't expect Britain to be run for them, right?
Yeah.
And that's fine, because they have countries of their own. But for some reason, when it's non-Europeans moving to Britain, the British government acts like they don't have countries of their own. And like, these people can't go home and arrive in a country that is majority of the same ethnic group or the same nationality and run in the interests of those people, right? So we act as if essentially every Pakistani in Britain is a refugee from Pakistan. And if we don't give them everything that they want, then the world comes to an end and they live in a terrible state of oppression or something. It's like, no, they can just go home. They have countries of their own. They can just go home if they don't like the way that we run the country. And that's just the attitude that we should take.
Exactly. And one of the reasons why I think that it's very important to pay close attention to what these leaders are saying is because there are considerable pressures to frame this debate as if you don't agree with the current paradigm of open borders, abstract multiculturalism, endless funds for the families of just everyone else in the world, if you don't agree with communist redistribution of wealth from the rich West to everyone else, you somehow have to go back to let's say mid-century Germany. And that's simply not the case. Just because the left is constantly bombarding people with that message, it doesn't mean that the message is correct.
Yes.
It's false.
And
you can be patriotic without going that way.
And again, one of the difficult things that is going to have to be addressed, frankly, is the concept of collective ownership.
Yeah.
This is a real thing that lives in people's minds, and the woke left have been trying to destroy this. And sorry, like, for example, Ireland, the Republic of Ireland is the property of the Irish people. It's collectively owned by them. If they don't want to have, 1 million foreigners come in a year like we've had, then they are actually within their rights to elect a government that won't do that.
Exactly.
Like the Greece is the collective property of the Greek people. These are real things, but the abstract liberal mind can't comprehend of such a thing because it only interpolates people as individuals. It's like, okay, but that's not true. People are part of groups, and groups have some claims. I'm sorry. It's just the way things are and the way things have always been. And if that's not true, why is it a problem if Donald Trump buys Palestine? Why is it a problem? You know it's true. You know it's true. You're goddamn liars. Sorry, Karen.
Speaking of Trump, we had Marine Le Pen praising Donald Trump. And she says Hurricane Trump is sweeping across the US, which has been engulfed in unbearable political correctness for too long. Everyone understands that something has changed. And I think that this is very correct. And she also says the influence of Europe is not a historical accident, but the logical blossoming whenever cultural diversity can express itself freely. And this is what I wanted to say before, is that diversity, again, is one of those words where we kind of have to go boo. And it's understandable because we constantly hear diversity is a strength, and it isn't. It's not that kind of diversity. But we need to bear in mind that the diversity that is supposed to be a strength, which it isn't, is top-down enforced. And if it was such a strength, we wouldn't need that propaganda.
Well, a plurality of independent sovereign nations is a fine thing to have, and everyone's for it. Yeah. I think that the French should have their own country, the Germans should have their own country, the Swiss should have their own country. Everyone agrees with that. And when that is that, because essentially, and I hate to use phrases like this, but that's essentially the natural order of things, right? Almost every revolution in history prior to 1776 was a national revolution against imperial power. So this is just the normal way that all people have always framed things throughout all of time until right now, when we've decided that actually this no longer obtains and actually people aren't entitled to what we would call a homeland. It's like, that's not true. That's not true.
Exactly. And all this goes straight back to the mainstream narrative that if you are in favor of your nation in any shape or form, you have to have ties to and draw inspiration from mid-century Germany, which again is absolutely
it's preposterous.
It's absolutely preposterous because the people who fought, let's say, the Germans in the mid-century weren't exactly rainbow brigades. Well, no, they wanted to save their country and their nation.
Like this thing, everyone who opposed, apart from maybe the Soviet Union, everyone who opposed the National Socialists in Germany were basically nationalists. Like every Western country took their own national interests seriously.
Here we have Viktor Orban again speaking about our friend Trump. The Trump tornado has changed the world in just a couple of weeks. An era has ended. Today everyone sees that we are the future. I really hope he is correct.
Very optimistic.
He is optimistic, but there are reasons to be optimistic here. Because it seems to me that Trump essentially is able to cast the ring into the fire.
Yes.
But there are also small pockets of the Khazad-dûm mountain
there are,
on a daily basis, and people must constantly cast the ring into the fire. But it's a strong start. And the scandal with USAID and the kind of involvement it demonstrably had.
I mean, it's showing us behind the curtain, isn't
it? Exactly. It shows how actually all this is enforced on a top-down manner. Yep. And if it was organic, it wouldn't require any such imposition.
Yep.
That's why. So I think when you mentioned the word the natural order of things, I think that's correct essentially, and that's what organically comes about, and it doesn't necessarily destroy the world.
It just doesn't destroy anything. It builds things that are very nice. It builds, countries that are broadly homogenous and happy with what they are. Yeah. Like it's the foundation of our ability to root out corruption. It's the foundation of our ability to be happy, is to know that the people around us are in some way predictable, right? They're in some way like us, and so we understand what they're thinking in broad terms and why they do the things that they do. Whereas at the moment, we've got an insane plurality of cultures in this country, and no one can explain why there's a guy with a knife in Dublin slashing people's throats, like happening. Why is he? Is it Islamic terror? No, he's someone from Brazil. Like, what is going? No, you can't explain these things because you have no idea what these people think. They're not predictable. You can't feel safe. The entire nature of the country changes when you're in this kind of psychic landscape.
And speaking of Ireland and the stabbings that you mentioned, there was a completely predictable reaction to that news, and the politicians went out and instantly started talking about the foreign narrative and how all this can be utilized in a far-right narrative.
We've got to save the Brazilians. There's only 200 million of them. There are only 6 million Irishmen. Like, come on. Anyway, sorry.
It's no reason to.
It's insufferable.
No reason to.
Just the Brazilians have their own country. Like, if they don't like the way you're running your country, they
and speaking of Brazil, they do have their own country, and which
it's
is
run by
destroyed
communists.
It's run by communists. And just a really small parenthesis: Lula was saying, "People, we have food shortages and inflation. Don't buy expensive food," which is the most moronic thing. So don't buy expensive food. All of you should go and buy cheap food, so the price of cheap food goes up, or we have a food shortage. It is this kind of mentality that people in this conference want to go against. Here we have Latinopoulou from Greece. She is the leader of the Voice of Reason party. Mm-hmm. That's a nice name, by the way.
That's a great name.
I'm a good rationalist as myself. I like it.
That's a really good name.
And she was saying basically that Greece faces demographic extinction. Yeah. And she says that she's talking about the whole problems that afflict Europe and how the demographic problem is used by mainstream media and by the unelected bureaucrats of the EU as a sort of the only way to solve as a solely economic issue, which can only be solved by mass migration, which is obviously not true. And it actually...
Mass migration doesn't cause the natives of a country to have kids.
Exactly.
It doesn't solve the issue. What it solves is the institutional problem. How do we pay pensions? Theoretically. But sorry.
And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if you're saying the only way to solve my economic problems and increase my GDP is by having an influx of people, then a lot of the natives can't find work because the wages are artificially placed down. Yep. And no, you can't have a family like that because you have less of a real wage. I mean, and even nominal wage.
The thing that we just can't admit is that the promises made in the 20th century are unsustainable. That's the thing that we're having trouble admitting, but that's the truth of it.
Exactly. So here we have Matteo Salvini from Italy. Said Europe is experiencing a deep crisis and we have the duty to join forces, work together and build a credible alternative to this failed Europe. 2025 will be the year of the Reconquista. Love it. Here we have people speaking against Matteo Salvini and also Elon Musk from Italian media saying that Elon and MAGA are a threat to Europe.
They're a threat to our bureaucracy.
Yeah,
probably. Yeah.
Stop the sovereigntists from the European populace. MAGA is a risk challenge between Lega and FDL.
At least they're taking them seriously.
Yeah, I mean, they cannot but take them seriously.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? There's a spectre haunting Europe.
Exactly. And again, there is this completely ridiculous angle in mainstream media that suggests that the only threat to Europe is Elon talking about things.
All of the great powers recognize MAGA as an entity.
The great power that haunts Europe is Elon's X.
Yeah.
You have Kanye tweeting about things.
I'm going to rewrite the Communist Manifesto in MAGA.
Yeah. And there are several, I would say, I mean, it's not rocket science. It's really
easy. It's actually really
It's really easy. It's very simple. Europe requires several really commonsensical policies to be solved. Yeah. It needs to refocus on identity. It needs to slash bureaucracy, slash funding for...
it's just Austrian economics.
For foreigners who come and don't work and literally burden the native population.
Well-established, well-traveled, well-proven economic theories. That's it.
Exactly. It's not rocket science.
It's not new. It's not difficult to understand.
Exactly. And also deport people who don't belong to places.
Really crazy.
Yeah, crazy. Just rocket science. And it was considered rocket science up until Donald Trump did it.
Yeah, well, it was considered impossible. Utopian thinking.
Yeah, so
Trump
I mean...
Malay just started on them.
Yeah, but...
alien just... Sorry.
Yeah, without borders, there's no country. Without borders, there's no country.
Lock up criminals. It's that simple.
Exactly. Yes. And it's really important to stress that the demographic problem is not merely an economic problem.
No.
It's a national problem. And if you want to save the family of the nation, well, you need to actually provide the economic conditions, among other things, for that family to survive. In Greece, for instance, it's mostly economic. People are very family oriented.
Yep.
They would have family if they were able to. There are the same pressures, like with some forms of feminism that go and tell women that the only way to be free and liberated is like being a careerist man. Just it doesn't work. So
trust me, that's not freedom.
I'm really optimistic, and I want to see just more about the MAGA movement. It's in its infancy right now. There can be all sorts of voices that say all sorts of things that can be frequently conflicting with each other, but one person has to hope, and we have to be optimistic.
Thanks for watching, folks. If you'd like to support us, come over to lotus.com, sign up for £5 a month, and then go and watch Connor and Harry's detailed breakdown of the latest Nosferatu film. I actually haven't had time to watch the film yet, but I did watch the breakdown, and now I really want to watch the film. It's an amazing piece of work, and I think you'll really like it. And while you're here, go over to X and follow us at lotuseaters_com.